Imagine it's 9th of August, 1965. You are a 34-year-old dock clerk living in Tanjong Pagar, Singapore. You rent 2 hot rooms above a provision shop, and when rain hits the zinc roof, you have to raise your voice to finish dinner. Your wife keeps the family savings in a biscuit tin, folded beside rent receipts and a photograph of your 2 children in school uniforms. Each morning you walk past the harbor smell of diesel, salt, and wet rope, hoping the next ship means another week of wages. At night, the radio talks about strikes, shortages, and politics, while your neighbors whisper about what will happen if the jobs tied to the British bases disappear. You do not dream of becoming rich. You dream of steady work, dry walls, and enough money that one bad illness does not ruin the month. If you have ever wondered how a country with no oil, no iron, and not even enough water of its own can end up among the richest places on earth per person, stay with me. What you're about to hear is not a fairy tale. It is a pattern. It has happened before in different forms, and once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. And if you find value in this kind of historical clarity, subscribing takes 2 seconds and keeps you ahead of what most people never notice until the numbers are already on the front page. Then the news lands like a hammer on thin glass. Singapore has separated from Malaysia. The island is now on its own. In the years around independence, unemployment had been in the double digits before easing to around 9%. Nearly 70% of people had been living in slums, and the country had no natural resources, no hinterland, and no real room for error. In 1968, the British also announced they would withdraw their forces, putting thousands of jobs at risk and threatening as much as 1/5 of the economy. From where you stand, this does not look like the birth of a rich nation. It looks like a trap with water on every side. And yet, within one lifetime, Singapore would go from roughly $500 of GDP per person in 1965 to about $56,000 by 2015 and more than $90,000 by 2024. That jump is so large, it sounds unreal, like a bicycle turning into a jet while still moving down the same road. This video is about how that happened, but it is also about something bigger, because Singapore was not the only small place to pull this off. Luxembourg did it through finance. Qatar did it through gas. Botswana came close through diamonds. Ireland showed how some of the numbers can become distorted, which means bent out of shape by global corporations. Different countries, different decades, same hidden mechanism. A tiny nation gets rich per person when it learns how to attach its small population to a river of money much larger than itself. Then it builds rules strong enough to catch that river instead of being washed away by it. Before we go further, there's something important to understand. Per capita is a simple idea with huge consequences. It means total output divided by total people. That is all. But that tiny phrase changes how history looks. If a giant country finds a new source of wealth, the prize is spread across millions or hundreds of millions of people. If a tiny country finds a way to plug itself into a global money machine, the same flow gets divided by a much smaller number. The result can look explosive. Think of it like a water wheel. A big country often depends on many streams at once. A small country can become rich if it plants one very well-built wheel in one very strong river. That river might be ships moving through a strategic port. It might be gas under the seabed. It might be foreign money looking for safe laws, low taxes, or a trusted place to park assets. It might even be profits from multinational companies that pass through on paper more than in real life. The secret is not size by itself. Size is just the lever. The real secret is specialization, which means doing one narrow thing so well, or so attractively, that the whole world keeps paying you for it. But there is a second half to the mechanism, and this is the part most people miss. The money has to be captured. A small state has to turn chance into structure. It needs ports, courts, pipelines, schools, contracts, political discipline, and some way of saving for bad years. Otherwise, the wealth is like rain on a tin roof. Loud for a moment, gone by morning. This is why some tiny states become astonishingly rich, while others stay exposed. The winning playbook is not just finding a gold vein, it is building the bucket before the storm. That brings us directly to Singapore. In the early 1960s, local leaders knew trade alone would not create enough jobs. A United Nations team led by Albert Winsemius said more than 200,000 jobs had to be created within 10 years if unemployment was to be beaten back. So Singapore changed its whole posture toward the world. Instead of trying to protect a tiny domestic market, it decided to export. Instead of treating foreign companies as predators by default, it invited them in, but on terms that fit a national plan. The Economic Development Board built industrial land in Jurong, a swampy area many mocked at the time. Old hands called it folly. It turned out to be a launch pad. The first part of Singapore's playbook was brutally practical. Find a problem the world already has, then become a reliable answer. In the late 1960s and 1970s, the world needed low-cost manufacturing, stable shipping, and a place in Asia where contracts were respected and strikes would not shut every gate. Singapore offered exactly that. Manufacturing's share of GDP rose from 14% in 1965 to 22% by 1975. Modern services rose from 16% of GDP in 1965 to 24% in 1985 and 28% by 2010. These numbers matter because they show the machine upgrading in stages. First, the island built factories. Then it climbed into finance, logistics, and high-value services. It did not jump straight to the penthouse. It took the stairs, one landing at a time. Now look at what ordinary people experienced. This was not growth that stayed inside a spreadsheet. Families left overcrowded slums for public housing. The Central Provident Fund, or CPF, a compulsory savings system that started in 1955, forced both workers and employers to put money aside. Later, those savings could help pay for homes, healthcare, and retirement. Today, contribution rates for many workers are still high, a reminder that Singapore's social model was built less like a lottery ticket and more like a locked steel box. Save first, consume later. Build security before comfort. The government did not simply tell people to work hard. It built a conveyor belt, which means a system that keeps moving people toward housing, savings, and basic stability, even when individual incomes are still modest. Lee Kuan Yew gets most of the attention in these stories, but the mechanism mattered more than the myth. Goh Keng Swee pushed economic planning. Technocrats, which means trained policy officials, focused on industrial peace, infrastructure, and education. English became an economic tool as much as a school subject because it made Singapore legible to global capital. The port became one of the island's engines. The island's geography had always been useful, but geography alone is just a harbor. Policy turned it into a switchboard for world trade. And here is the part many people miss. Singapore did not become rich because it was small. It became rich because its leaders treated smallness as discipline. A large country can afford some waste, some regional dead weight, some political drift. A city-state cannot. In a tiny apartment, every broken pipe matters. Singapore governed like a country that knew one leak could flood the whole floor. Sound fiscal and monetary policy kept investor trust. State-linked firms were organized to compete commercially. Temasek was created in 1974 to manage government-owned investments with commercial discipline rather than day-to-day political meddling. By the time global companies came looking for a base in Asia, Singapore had made itself less like a poor island and more like a precision tool. Still, the deeper lesson is not copy Singapore. History rarely works like tracing paper. The deeper lesson is that tiny nations become rich when they stop thinking like small victims and start thinking like indispensable middlemen. Singapore became a toll booth on the highway of Asian trade, then upgraded itself into a control room. The ships were global, the factories were global, the money was global, but enough of that value was anchored on a very small island. That output per person rose with extraordinary force. Here is something I want you to think about before we go further. When you hear that a tiny country is rich per person, do you picture ordinary families getting richer, or do you picture a clever machine pulling in outside money? Drop your answer in the comments, seriously. Because what I am about to show you next is the part of this story that most people never hear, and it changes everything. This leads to the second part of the story. If Singapore shows the trade and industry version of the playbook, Luxembourg shows the finance version. Today, Luxembourg sits near the very top of global GDP per person rankings, with more than $128,000 per person in 2023. That is an eye-catching number, but the road there was not some smooth royal procession. For much of its modern history, Luxembourg was tied to steel. On the eve of the First World War, it ranked among the world's 6 largest producers. In 1970, steel still made up 27.9% of the country's added value. Then came the squeeze. From 1975 to 1985, the global steel crisis hit hard. In 1985, only about 1,300 people worked in Luxembourg steel, roughly half as many as in 1974. For a small country, that is not just an industrial slump. That is a cracked foundation. The government, employers, and labor groups leaned into the tripartite system, a table where major actors negotiated together to avoid destructive conflict. While steel declined, Luxembourg doubled down on services. The tertiary sector rose from 38% of added value in 1958 to 77% by 1995. Luxembourg built a reputation for legal certainty and tax arrangements. Recent industry figures show funds measured in the trillions of euros. Around 47% of employees working in Luxembourg are cross-border commuters. They help create the output, but are not counted in the resident population denominator. Small rich states live like elegant glass houses. Qatar shows a third version, where money came from liquefied natural gas, or LNG. By 2024, Qatar built an extremely efficient toll road from the gas field to the world market, with GDP per person among the highest on Earth. There's a reason this matters for our playbook. Resource wealth is often the easiest form of small country riches to misunderstand. People imagine treasure chests. The real story is usually pipes, contracts, shipping terminals, and power over timing. Gas under the ground is not wealth in the same way flour in a pantry is not bread. It becomes wealth only when a state can extract it, process it, price it, transport it, and keep enough of the returns from leaking away. In that sense, Qatar's real resource was not gas alone. It was state capacity, which means the ability to turn an underground asset into an organized national income stream. And yet, this version of the playbook also shows the sharpest divide between national averages and human reality. The official story is prosperity, glass towers, new roads, air-conditioned malls, global airlines, mega projects. The hidden story is that much of the building was done by temporary migrant labor. Citizens experienced one side of the wealth machine. Many workers imported to sustain the boom experienced another. The country's average income looked like a high tide lifting all boats. In reality, some people were on yachts, some were rowing supply barges, and many never owned a boat at all. That does not make Qatar an illusion. It makes it a concentrated system. The money is real. The infrastructure is real. The strategic advantage is real, but the distribution of comfort is far less even than a per capita ranking suggests. This is one of the most counterintuitive facts in economic history. A nation can be incredibly rich per person, while large groups remain far from rich. The scoreboard says abundance. The work camps, debt burdens, or wage hierarchies tell a more fragmented story. Qatar also reveals something else. The richest, tiny states usually know that one pillar is not enough forever. Official plans have long emphasized diversification into finance, tourism, technology, and education because leaders understand a simple truth. A single revenue stream can make you rich. It can also make you hostage. The same gas exports that built the modern state also taught the state to worry about dependency. In history, every great wealth engine casts its own shadow. Most people will never know what you now know. Most people will keep trusting rankings they do not understand. If you're still here, you are not most people. Hit subscribe, because the next section is the part this channel was made for. The part they never put in textbooks. Now look at all three together. Singapore, Luxembourg, Qatar, different continents, different political systems, different resources, same mechanism. A tiny resident population is connected to a giant external flow. In Singapore, the flow is trade, manufacturing, and high-end services. In Luxembourg, it is global finance, funds, and cross-border labor. In Qatar, it is hydrocarbon export revenue, above all LNG. The channel changes, the river does not. And this is where history gets uncomfortable. Once you see the pattern, you realize how often people tell the story backward. They say a country became rich and then built strong institutions. Very often, the institutions came first. Or at least, they came early enough to catch the money when it arrived. Singapore built industrial land, labor peace, education, savings, and state capacity before the giant payoff was obvious. Luxembourg built legal credibility and a negotiating culture strong enough to manage a shift out of steel. Qatar built export infrastructure and long-term contractual relationships that turned underground gas into a reliable stream of outside income. The money mattered, yes, but the bucket mattered too. There is also a mathematical edge to all of this. If $10 billion flows through a country of 5 million people, that is meaningful. If 10 billion flows through a country of 500,000 people, the per-person figure becomes astonishing. Small numbers on the population side act like a magnifying glass. That is why rich microstates and mini-states so often dominate per capita tables. But magnification can mislead. It can make a concentrated flow look like universal comfort. It can make a legal advantage look like a national miracle. It can even make paper profits look like domestic prosperity. The same mechanism, different countries, different decades, same result. At this point, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Tiny nations do best when they turn one narrow advantage into a global service the world keeps paying for. Then they deepen it, then they protect it. The playbook has 4 moving parts. First, find a bottleneck, which means a place where the world needs something moved, processed, financed, stored, or guaranteed. Second, build trust around that bottleneck. Third, keep the population denominator small while the external flow scales up. Fourth, save and reinvest enough of the windfall that one bad year does not blow the roof off. When any part of that chain breaks, the miracle starts looking much less magical. So who gets hurt when the chain breaks, or when the wealth never reaches everyone in the first place? History's answer is painfully consistent. The people farthest from the real source of the money usually suffer first. Migrant workers, renters, small business owners serving boomtown demand, families tied to one industry, savers who mistake a national headline for personal safety. The tower can look golden from the outside while the basement floods. Qatar is a clear example. Its GDP per person remains among the highest in the world. In 2024, the World Bank put it at about $76,189. The country's LNG machine is still huge, and official plans aim to raise LNG capacity further in the years ahead. Yet the lived experience inside the country has never been evenly distributed. Qatari citizens benefited from income and stability, but much of the physical labor behind the boom was done by migrants. The skyline rose quickly. The comfort did not spread evenly. In other words, the national average looked like polished marble. The labor market underneath often felt more like scaffolding. Botswana offers another lesson, and it is one of the most important in this entire story because it shows both success and fragility at once. Diamonds were discovered in 1967. Botswana, the joint venture between the state and De Beers, became the backbone of the economy. Botswana did many things right. It maintained a stable legal framework. It saved through the Pula Fund, created in 1994. It invested in infrastructure, health, and education. It avoided much of the so-called resource curse. This means natural resources, making a country poorer in the long run by feeding corruption, inflation, and dependence. For decades, Botswana was held up as the African exception. Diamond money funded roads, schools, and clinics. But dependence never truly disappeared. Recent reporting shows diamonds still account for roughly 80% of foreign earnings. When natural diamond prices weakened, the stress came fast. In 2024, Botswana reported a 43% drop in diamond output in one quarter. Behind those numbers was a woman named Keora Petsekoko, who had spent 17 years polishing diamonds before losing her job. She had been earning around $300 a month, enough to anchor a household. Then the anchor snapped. Ireland adds one more warning. A tiny country can become rich on paper faster than real life improves. Low taxes and EU membership pulled in multinationals. In 2015, GDP surged by 26% in a single year. This was because a few companies shifted assets and profits. Economists joked about leprechaun economics. Statistics moved faster than reality. This matters because it shows per capita wealth can be solid, inflated, or mixed. Singapore rise translated into housing and stability. Same scoreboard. Very different games. If this channel helps you think differently about the world, subscribe.